nerds!
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by Underdog. I'm away today, so I have commissioned Tambo to put together a supercut of his best PGA DFS strategy from his DFS Mastermind program. All the stuff normally behind a paywall. However, today you get a chance to dig into why Tambo is so successful at playing DFS, why he does this for a living. He'll have his tips, he'll have his strategy. He's put together a compilation of a bunch of different shows. You can always check out his program. He'll have a little bit more on that a bit later on. But I want to remind everyone to smash the like while you're here, sub to Mayo Media Network, and buy tickets to the live PME show. June 7th in Toronto. Tickets selling very fast, so you're going to want to get in right now. All of that information is in the description of this video and podcast. So, with that said, on with the show.
What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka Totec and Tambo. And on this episode of Inside the Mind, gonna talk to my guy GSLuke, GSLuke DFS. If you don't follow him over on YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, make sure you do. Ton of good stuff. He's been helping us out a ton with the PGA DFS stuff over at Ship It Nation, especially for Showdown. But we're gonna take it a little bit of a different route today. Gonna get some of Luke's background story, his history, everything that he does, how he got into all of this. And then we're gonna be doing this segment focused on betting, props, underdog, prize picks, and then how some of that information can then be taken over to the DFS streets to try and combine it and keep it all circled back to DFS Mastermind. But this bonus section should be really good for everybody. Luke, appreciate you again, man. Always helping me out and helping everybody out in the community. What's going on, man? How you doing today?
Of course, yeah. Glad to be on the show here, be able to give a little bit of my process out to the people.
I certainly appreciate that. And obviously you're crushing it now. Love to see it. That's why I wanted to get you on here to be able to break this all down. We are going to talk about, I know some people say, well, I don't even have it in my states, all this. We're going to talk about how it all correlates, how you can use it in different ways. If you don't have access to this, what can you do instead? There's all different ways. And I do kind of want to start there, just how you view the overall landscape. There's no right or wrong answer. It's opinion based, but I mean, you have a good handle on it, I think, because you do cover all of it. Some people just bet on sports. They put their 5 to 7 golfer, or for those that we're not going to talk about here, their 20 golfer card out each week, but they are the hidden bets. But yeah, throw a little pun, little shot there. But I will say, like, there's people that just golf bet, and that's great. There's some people that mix into the underdog and the prize picks world or different things like that. We've got some stuff upcoming with Splash Sports. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. So there's that. And then there's DFS. So how do you view the landscape? What's sort of the, for you? And then maybe you can relate it to, how you could see it work for others and how they can really make it their own and not be so overwhelmed necessarily, because I think that it is a factor. I know it's you just bet them and you're good. Like, I get it, but there is still something to correlating and putting it all together and being able to balance it as well.
Yeah, I enjoy all those different pieces of exposure. That's why I do a lot of content for all those different pieces, because I know everyone kind of has their thing that they enjoy. I know a lot of people watching DFS Mastermind. That's probably DraftKings for a lot of you guys out there. And if you're playing golf, main slate Showdown is probably what you guys do a lot of. But golf in general is a whole lot of fun. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably realized that by playing, whether it's those different slates that we just talked about. But I like playing all these different sports, and I find it really helpful to be doing research for all those different sides. So, like, for example, you mentioned might not even having underdog and prize picks available in your state. Using those lines to your advantage can still be extremely helpful. Though there are edges that you can find against those books, they are pretty accurate with the pricing for the most part. And for example, you can take a look at their strokes board before any given round and get a pretty good sense for projections on players. Now, it's not going to be like a DraftKings projection that you're looking at there, but if you've got somebody at a 70.5 projection, somebody at 71.5, they're nearly the same ownership. They're in that same pricing range. Well, I'm not saying to go out there and always play the guy that's down there at 70.5, but maybe it's worth considering as a data point in the back of your head. So there's those sort of things. I do a lot of researching for the individual categories. So that they have like birdie or better lines. They have bogey lines that they post, greens regulation, fairways, all of that sort of stuff. And by staying on top of that, I mean, I go crazy with the prop stuff. I spend a ton of time out there researching players. It teaches you so much about these players' skill sets. Like, I know the most accurate players on tour pretty much by heart at this point, like the top 25 out there. Greens regulation, same thing out there with the most aggressive birdie makers out there on the PGA Tour. And if it's a course where accuracy is going to be rewarded, it's great to know that off heart. Now, you can do the research yourself. Are you going to learn those things over time? But by getting exposure to these different spots, and you don't even have to, sometimes it's just going in there and looking at what these sites have to offer. It's going to teach you a lot about not only the golfers out there, but how to project them as well. So I always think there's a lot of value in looking into those things, and matchup markets as well. Like, you'll get head-to-head markets out there for full events, even if it's just for a single round at a time. Like, you'll get the 3 balls over there on those books too. Same thing with the ownership. Like, you have a couple guys, they're in that same range. They're all about the same price, similar ownership numbers. If one of them's plus 140 to go out there and win the matchup, the other ones are plus 200 or more, you might want to consider the guy that's only plus 140 because they don't build all those casinos, all those sports books out there in Vegas, those $1 million properties by taking losing bets out there from other people. So it's a fun game to play against them, to try and, take some money out there from their sports books. That's always a nice thing when the bettor goes out there and is able to bring home a score. But it's those other aspects too that I think just make me a better DFS player. I've got probably one of the best backgrounds when it comes to knowing the skill sets of these players. And it just comes down to really breaking down the stats, right? It's not even just the shots gained metrics, but all these, rabbit holes that we go down with when it comes to fairways and greens.
Yeah, I think a couple key things there, and it's all great stuff. So we'll carry on in a second. I do want to talk a little bit more about how you sort of take it to the DFS streets for a second and putting it all together, because there's too many birdie makers or too many aggressive players. Not, you can never have too many birdie makers. I mean, too many aggressive players and too much boom bust and variance that you're not really you're over leveraging or something. We'll talk more on that in a second. But one key thing you said, and I want to just point out, because I think it's important, and a lot of people watching DFS Mastermind probably already have this built into their process, but I think that's where people lose the plot a little bit. Like, we'll say in golf, for example, it's definitely not the same as NBA when it comes to projections. Clearly not. One is really projectable. You've got their minutes, you've got their points per minute. There's still variance, don't get me wrong, but you can't be 30 points behind in projection to start the night and then not late swap and be 40 points behind and then wonder what happened. We know what happened. You played a terrible lineup to start with. Your process is broken because you're not using projections for a very heavy projection-based sport with a long sample size. We'll talk about sample size later on. But to your point, a lot of the matchup and the Vegas stuff is baked in to DFS projections. It gives you a great idea of how to get there in the first place. So sometimes it's twofold for me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but someone will say, I don't get how this guy's projection is so good. Well, some of it is baked in off of those lines, and they believe it is. And that's some of the surprising stuff. People are like, how did this guy finish top 20? Well, his top 20 odds were actually good. If you looked at them at the start of the tournament, you just didn't consider it because your bias said Kurt Kitayama sucks now, so he can't do it. They still have him as this on their baseline, on long-term, on how they project, on how they do it. It's not always going to be the exact, but it's just saying that's part of the thought process. And then the other side of it is, like, people, if it's already baked in, then you can look at that. And I always talk about reviewing more than just what happened after a DFS tournament ends, is you should be reviewing going in. If you can find those trigger spots of like, okay, everyone's playing Tommy Fleetwood today. He's like 35% owned, but Cantlay is 19% owned. That is a pretty solid leverage spot. And you look and they're almost the same numbers. Their matchups are similar. Their odds for the day, like all that, like that's a spot where the public is just going off of one thing. You have something else that matches up that can still go off another. So I think there's a lot with the Vegas stuff where people say, well, it's already baked in, but some of those same people saying that aren't even using projections. They're still going by hand or what they think they know, and biases, whatever it is, where they'll go by it and then be mad that it didn't go their way. And it's like, there was other ways you can add this into your process. Would you agree?
For sure. And I think it's priced in, like you see it with the DraftKings pricing every week. It's follows the odds board almost exactly, but the ownership is where I think the like opportunity comes in, because people will own guys way higher than they should be just because it's steamed up in content. So I think you're spot on with that. Like, you can use it to make some of those 50-50 decisions. And it probably shouldn't be the biggest part of your process. It's far from the biggest part of my process. But when I'm really trying to make a hard decision, let's say it's like trying to choose a stud up top. And I think the Fleetwood Cantlay example is a good one, because I really liked both of those players this week. Sleeper, I guess, I did play both, so I guess maybe not the best example, but if I was choosing between one of those two, then maybe someone I wasn't playing, the odds could have been a really good way to choose between the two. So it's something I always incorporate, and it's not even just like the matchup odds, that sort of thing. It's getting a good idea for, like, sometimes players will be in terrible form. So, like, for example, Justin Thomas last year always had the respect from the books, even when he wasn't playing good golf. And that's something that I noticed out there from sites like DraftKings and FanDuel, is even when he was out of form last year, missing cuts, finishing like T30, T40, he'd still be up there with guys like Hideki Matsuyama with the odds. In fact, sometimes Hideki might be like minus 130 for a certain number, like 70.5. Justin Thomas was sometimes minus 140 to minus 150. So in DFS, I take shots on those sort of players that the books they believe in their long-term talent. They believe in that long-term pedigree. And that's usually something I try and lean into in DFS anyways, is giving a little bit of freedom, giving a little bit of forgiveness to guys that maybe aren't playing as well, especially when it's a long-term talent like that. And obviously we've seen what's happened to Justin Thomas over the last few months. And I think that's what a lot of those books are betting on when they're doing that sort of thing. So like currently, for example, Scotty Scheffler, maybe not having the best start to 2025, but they're projecting him just like last year. Like, he's a half a stroke to a stroke better for every single round, including even comparing to guys like Rory McIlroy, which, helps me take some of the bias out of golf. Just kind of look at it for what it is, the numbers, and take some of those emotional reactions out that sometimes I feel like we have.
Yeah, before we go to some of the roster construction, I mean, it still does tie into it, like player pool, I guess, sticking with DFS is, how much are you trusting in, and it goes to the betting markets. This is where you can correlate some of your thoughts and bring it to that is if you set it up where, like, the Victor Hovland win recently, it's a guy that you were like, okay, he is fiddling around with everything. It's really tough to trust him off of 3 missed cuts. But if you took his long-term stuff, at one point he was projected to be, top 3 player in the world and stuff. Like, it was definitely on that type of pattern. That year, I think it was last year, 2024, before the season started, what he was coming off of and just how good he was, people were talking about multiple major wins. It turned out to be Xander getting multiple major wins last year. But just to note it, I mean, that type of stuff is important to think about. And even if it doesn't work out every time, you're definitely going to be different, because so many people in DFS specifically are trusting the recent form as like the be all end all, or the course history, which we'll get to in a second. But I will definitely say recent form has sort of overtaken it, I think, now, where more people trust that. And if a guy like him, they just can't touch him with a 10-foot pole. But the upside was, man, that price was really low in DFS, and his long-term talent was phenomenal still. And even if you use models and stats, I did part of this DFS boot camp with Byron, the model maniac. He was talking about the stats and the models and the long-term and stuff. So where are you at on that spectrum of using the long-term versus blending it? Like, how do you work through that stuff?
So Victor Hovland's actually a great example of that. I'm not sure if you saw my tweets on it before that week. I'm not sure if you're kind of alluding to that, but I mentioned with Victor Hovland before that week even started on a Monday that I think that him playing in weaker field events could be the quote unquote fix for Victor, because before that point, and this is not an exaggeration, he had not played in a quote unquote regular PGA Tour event since May of 2023. By regular PGA Tour event, I mean non-signature event, non-major, and then non-DP World Tour event. So he played in some like smaller DP World Tour stuff, but no Valeros, none of those tournaments where it's just like regular players, 144 to 156 players. And I said, this guy might not be that far off, because when you look at his shots gained in those events, he was gaining like an average of 0.5 to 1.5 shots per round, which is below his baseline. He had normally been better than that. Like you said, top 3 player in the world. Everyone was picking him to go out there and win a major out there last year, and then fell off. And I think that's where the stats can sometimes throw people aside, especially when they're just focusing on that recent form, because we have to remember what events that those are coming from. But the more and more I've done DFS, this is something I actually have to do for props all the time, is you have to adjust for field strength, because at major championships, guys like Scotty, Rory McIlroy aren't going to gain nearly as many strokes to the field on average as what you have on a week like this or last week at the Houston Open. Like, they were clearly the best players that you had in that field. And with Victor Hovland, to bring it back to that example, he had played in no events like that. He had played only against the world's best for such a long time at that point that we forgot that compared to your average Joe out there, that Victor Hovland is still world-class talent. So I played him that week in DFS, kind of like threw it out there as like a question to the community. I was like, are we sure that he's really broken? And I didn't think it was going to happen that week. I didn't think it was going to happen the first time he played in a lower tier event, but I think that really hammers that home where a lot of times we look at the guys that are playing super well with their recent form in these weak tier events and give them far too much credit. And we hold it against players, some of the world-class guys, like even a Max Homa, we could say this about. He's still playing in some signature events, and his shots gained metrics look terrible lately, but he's probably not that far off because of the kind of fields that he's playing against. So they kind of tie it into that. That's the main thing that I do out there with that kind of argument, is that I will always look for the long-term players. Like Jordan Spieth went through his downturn last year. This year, I think you're going to start to see the old Jordan Spieth come back a little bit. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, a couple key points there that I want to talk about, actually. One, specifically, just what you talked about, like the long-term talent and the strength of field. I think people don't. So one, I'll go to strength of field in a second. One is the deep dive. It's a constant theme. It's literally why you're in DFS Mastermind. You're doing a deep dive, so you're doing the right stuff. But it's still, you can't just join it and then it's like getting a gym membership and then not actually lifting the weights. And not saying anyone isn't. I'm just saying this is the point, is hearing about it, knowing you're in the right place to learn about this stuff is one thing. Then actually going and actioning it is the other. And to Luke's point, when you go back and look, so many people do this. The recent form is great for Rico Hoey. Okay, great. And he's ball striking awesome, but he played in like the Mexico Open, Birdie Fest, to something else. And then he gets to a harder event and they're like, wow, he didn't strike the ball as good or he didn't score as well. Well, no shit. He's playing in a completely different style of event. Mm-hmm. That's the easy one to me. The one that, again, not everybody sees that way. So I want you to make it the easy one. That's the point of this, and add that into your process. Like, what events did those actually happen in? How did they gain it? The same can be applied to Showdown. Oh, their approach was horrible. You go back and look in data golf and do the deep dive. It was hole 17. They went in the water twice, and therefore their approach was horrible, but they actually were dialed on every other hole and missed those putts. You write them off because it's not the quick glance of good approach, bad putter. It's bad approach, bad putter. And you're like, and they were horrible. No, they weren't. They were very bad on one hole. The other 17 went fine. That I'm going to play them. And guess what? I'm going to get them at way lower ownership because most people don't do the work and do the deep dive. So Luke's continuing that theme. You got to put the work in. What's up, everyone? Hopefully you're enjoying this video so far, but just going to give you a quick overview of the Mastermind project. If you see the link throughout the video or in the description below, it is shipitnation.com/mastermind. That's simple. Enter code Mayo and you save almost 50% off. So if you want to get involved and check this out and learn more, you can go into it. When you are a member, just a quick note here, you'll see it. This is the community in the background. So you get everything that's inside of this each month. There's an upcoming content schedule. So this month I had Model Maniac, Byron, on to do stats and models. You're watching Props and Betting with GSLuke. My guy G Risen's going to come on to break down MLB since it just came back. I had the Mish and M. Bellman 967 on for interviews, exclusive interviews that you won't see anywhere else. I did another community review for the RBC Heritage Open just this past Monday. We did our Q&A roundtable last week for the May planning and what's coming up in May. And then we have a PGA roundtable Q&A coming up in May. So if you're not a member yet, now is a good time to join. When you go in, it's very simple. You just go to the strategy page. This is where you're going to get the stats and models, the process props, which you're watching now. We had a NASCAR video, my PGA optimizer process. You're completely watching over my shoulder as I break down my process with SaberSim, bankroll management, and contest selection. If you're struggling with that, it tells you exactly what it is here. You can see this stuff in the free tour. A lot of people ask for this one, building in sets, my exact process for building in sets for PGA. Interviews, you can go in and see. I just did the one with the Mish, Neil Orfield, DJ, and you can go get that video for free. My guy Hybes22, just all these players, a ton of success. Hebrew Cheetah, partner over at Ship It Nation, he's in here. Creighton over on FanDuel, Sheets, MB Habes that you can get here and be able to see them. And it's just a ton that you learn about their background history and how they got to the point of finding success. Case studies, Q&A, events, and you can make requests. There's a Discord and more. So make sure if you want to get in, go to the site, shipitnation.com/mastermind, use code Mayo, and you save just under 50% off. It's a one-time payment. You're in for life. Hopefully this is helpful, guys. Now back to the video. But you nailed something. And I've spoke about this for years. And I used to call it, I know it's a bit older now and not quite the same example, but it was called the Adam Scott effect is what I talked about. It was the strength of field factor. People forgot that this almost international man of mystery would get off his private jet in his khakis and show up, and he only played in the best fields in the world at the hardest courses in the world. And they would call this guy a piece of shit because he would finish 30th or 28th or 24th. And I'm like, you got to remember, he's in the 7 or 8K range. He's basically your average price golfer coming through for you in events with the best players in the world, the hardest conditions, the toughest tracks only. He doesn't go to any of these events. And unfortunately for him, the year that I called this one, it didn't work out, but he just missed the playoff. I don't know if you remember this. It was the Wyndham that year at Sedgefield.
Wow, that was a crazy one, man.
Remember? Like he had a 5-foot putt. He ended up being the one that missed the playoff while like 4 or 5 other guys got into it. But that event was literally, if anyone goes back and can spot check it, it was like one of the first times in forever, the Victor Hovland effect now that you talk about, where he said, you know what? I'm going to play in a weaker field. It's actually still not the easiest track, but it was definitely a much weaker field than you would ever find Adam Scott in back then. And he came out and performed well. And that's why he still gets the love. And I know you get a little bit older, things change. Justin Rose, Adam Scott, Sergio Garcia on Live, which you're going to watch later. Like these guys used to be, if you started your lineups back in the day of DFS with Sergio, Justin Rose, Hideki, and Adam Scott, that's like kind of how you started your builds. That was the best ball strikers in the world. And you started your lineups. We're dating ourselves now going way back, or I am at least. But just to note it, you could at one point fit all those guys in the lineup. But they were a little bit more expensive back then than they are now. But the point is, you do have to factor strength of field. It takes extra work. What fields were those results in? What type of course were they played on? That's where it's not even necessarily using long-term form as much as long-term talent versus the talent they faced off against recently versus the type of courses and events they played at. It doesn't give you the be-all, end-all, but if you're not factoring that in, I promise you others are, and there is a lot of validity to it on a long-term sample size, because now you can take that over different tiers of golfers, over different eras, if you will. I'm not trying to date us that far, but I'm saying like you take it the last 3 years versus the 3 years before that. Scotty Scheffler wasn't even a thing 3 years ago. You know what I mean? Like that, he was a thing, but not yet on the PGA Tour. And that people knew Scotty Scheffler was going to be something special, but it wasn't like he is now. So it's like there's always different little segments, if you will. But using this knowledge, it has been a forever thing of being able to attack strength of field and using it to your advantage and typically in your favor at lower ownership. Anything you want to add on to that?
No, I think you're spot on with that, man. Like that idea in general too, you can extend in either direction, like you were saying. Like you could look at guys that were playing at too easy of golf courses and hold it against them. That's key. And something I meant to mention before is I know we talk about the weather a lot when it comes to DFS Showdown, that sort of thing. You learn course conditions real quick when you're paying attention to those prop boards, and just like how you expect the course to play in general. So I know we can talk about that a little bit too, but just learning course conditions, getting an idea for like what side of the draw might be easier or harder. I probably learned 99% of that art just from doing prop stuff.
Yeah, we can stick with that a little. I would segment. I guess I'll segue it a little bit different, but we kind of just talked a bunch about recent form, strength of field. We mixed and blended that all in. But where do you stand on course history? Just because that's one people always want to talk about, learn about, know about, get different takes on. So again, very subjective, but just out of a thought process and with having you here, sort of where would you stand on course history?
So course history, I'm a course history truther, I guess. I put like on the spectrum, I'd definitely be towards that side of things, but I'm not by all means like a course history, like you have to have it for every single play. I think it's helpful, especially with some low owned pivots. Like for example, if you can find somebody that's a little bit below average ownership, but that's got good course history, I'll take a shot on them in GPP lineups all day, because I'm a firm believer in guys having courses they like, places where they're a little bit more comfortable than other places on tour. Whether that's just having that sort of success there, right? It kind of calms people down sometimes, or it's just a good setup. Like you've heard players say that, like, I hit a lot of the clubs I like around here. I'm able to hit driver and I like that. Some players, right, that might fit their style of game. That's why I like course history for lower owned players. Now, if you're talking about like Akshay this week or Corey Connors for this golf tournament, where, yeah, sure, they've both won this. Corey Connors won it twice, but they're the chalkiest guys that you have on the slate. And that's where I draw the line, because I don't think it should be the main thing that you're looking at. To me, that's modeling. I know you were talking about Byron with a lot of that. I do a lot of that myself. That's usually my first data point that I'm looking at. Course history is probably data point number 3 or 4 that I'm going through my list. So it's always helpful, but I feel like some people take it to the extreme. And when you get that, like with what you had with those guys this week, that's when I jump ship.
Yeah, I want to add something too, because it really just, the benefit of having these conversations is just sort of like over the kitchen counter type of conversation everybody can relate to. I love that. You sort of think of other things, and just sticking with the theme here of the deep dive. One thing I'll note too that I think is important, because I've always been on the opposite side of the course history thing, is I'm like, it's a sample size thing, which we're about to get into in a second anyway, and go there next. But my point being, the sample sizes are limited. The trends, you can't spell trend without end. I've coined that one. Like, all these different things. I get it, and I like them, and they really work well on the short sample stuff. I find of like, it's not really a trend as much as a stat line. That's the sample size is yesterday. But clearly, I'd rather play round 2 showdown than round 1 when I have that information. Does it mean it's going to work or be accurate? I don't know, but at least I have some insight now, so I feel better. And then I can apply DFS thoughts of game theory, correlation, if it's weather, wave, ownership across the field. If everyone's building this way, maybe I'm leaving money because there's only 2 guys in the morning wave that are expensive, so everyone's going to gravitate to them, but they all play the same 18 holes during the same good period. They could still get beat. So there's other intricacies to it. But with course history, the one thing I will note is people focus too much on the course history. If it's Augusta National Golf Club, we already talked about, we're at the Valero Texas Open 2025, the Masters being next week. That's something to knowing the golf course. These golfers typically never get to go out there, or if they do, it's a privilege or a specialty or whatever, and they get an opportunity to go play it. But the ones that have already played it have picked up these things. They get more practice rounds. They get more things. So there's other items. They've got more insight from the locals. Like, there's clearly something to playing the same course that even yourself, if you play golf out there, will know. It's when you go to your home course, you know a lot more about it than the courses that you go to randomly on vacation. Yes, that's helpful. But you nailed a key point that, again, I think requires a deep dive, and not as many people do it. It's weird that, let's say, Denny McCarthy plays well here and not so many other places. But then you can deep dive the course history and say, oh, it's actually when he plays, and it's funny because I stack things that I typically don't believe in or I make fun of, like putting splits and things like that. But I'm saying if you're going to do it, I do like doing it and stacking them, because now it's like their course history is good here. What could it be? Oh, it's a shorter course. Oh, I noticed he also plays good on other shorter courses. Oh, you know what's funny? It's shorter courses with Bermuda. I'm just using like on the Florida swing. Oh, so now it's actually more that he's a Florida swing guy than it is he's a Cognizant Classic / Honda Classic back in the day guy. It's when he gets out there in Florida. Oh, I found out he also went to Florida State or something. Like there's all or his background history. He's done all that. It's not just course history necessarily, but some of it can be sort of retroactive to like other factors. And again, it sounds crazy because now I'm stacking a bunch of things that I'm not a full truther on. I like your use of the course history truther. Yeah. I'm not necessarily that guy, but if I'm going to go that route, I'm going to deep dive it to find out, is there something more to it? And then look to use those things to my advantage. And again, if you, like you said, the key is the ownership. If I can then get it at that, some people will write it off because they'll go just one level of it and say, I'm not a course history guy. I'm going this way. But there's other factors to it that link up, and it's all hindsight after the fact where someone says, oh, well, I wish I knew he went to Florida State and crushed it on Bermuda. You could have found that stuff out. Like, that stuff exists. That's the whole point. And anything you're trying to find an edge in or an angle of attack, you got to be putting the work in. You got to work harder than the next person. Nobody cares work harder. Work harder, not smart. Work smarter, not harder. All these factors, they all line up and they're cliche, but they matter in something like this. So I was glad you brought that up, and I think it's a good way to tie it together. Real quick, let's just touch on these sample sizes, the trends, some of that stuff, because an example would be, and why I used to have that's what these calls are for me being open to getting ideas that can help others, because they probably have similar feelings. They may agree with you more than me, and that's okay. That's what it's about. But they want to know, like, where are we thinking on this stuff? And one I always have is like the sample size stuff. Oh, they have good course history here. Well, they've got 14th 2 years ago, and 4 years ago, they got 21st. They are only 7K. That's great price in DraftKings. And they do have course history, but it's 2 times, and it's 24 months ago and 48 months ago. Like, what does that literally have anything to do with today and this week? I think the answer is nothing, but is it because there's other factors that climb in with it, and ownership and reasoning, or is it just something we use to validate? What's your thoughts on sample size, trends, all that stuff?
Yeah, so I'm somebody that likes to think of golf as the whole picture, like almost as a whole puzzle, and I will never use one specific data point that heavily. So I think what you were saying about the course history spot on is most of the time the reason why guys play well at a golf course isn't just the golf course history itself, like them having decent weeks there. It's because it's a good course fit. It's because it's on a grass type that they like. Maybe it's a course that they've played a lot even before they run the PGA Tour. Like we've heard examples of that with guys like Matty Fitz at the RBC Heritage and whatnot. So I think that it's usually a lot more complicated what people think it's going to be. Like, for example, guys at Augusta National that play pretty well, a lot of times it's apex height. Like the guys that show up there year and year are just the guys that can launch the ball into the air and get the ball to stop. Some golf courses have that little aspect to them, and not everyone does. Some of them are completely random. Like Bermuda Championship is infamous for having almost no correlation when it comes to the course history. Like you'll have guys there that win, miss the cut twice in a row, and then go out there and like top 5 again. Those are the kind of courses where course history to me means essentially nothing. Kind of like what I think that's the case for most weeks for you out there in your process. Like course history is not a big part of it. And for me, it's kind of the same thing. Like I am always looking for a more nuanced process, always using a variety of different factors rather than just one or two. And I get a lot of questions like on the showdown streams I do about like cutoff points for like weather edges and stuff, cutoff points for like ball striking stats and whatnot. I am such a proponent of not using cutoff points. Like I know we like when things are black and white out there, when it's super easy to go out there and make decisions. Hardly ever in PGA DFS are we going to get black and white decisions. They're almost always going to be a lot more complicated than that, which is why I think you have to have the course history discussion as a little bit more than just like, do we believe in it or not? Because I think it is so dependent on each situation that we're going through. And it's like the same thing with the weather. Like we had a slate a couple weeks ago where as the day went on, it got slightly windier and it was a round 3 slate. So they were teeing off of 1 and there were tee times throughout the entire day. And people are like, oh, what's the cutoff point? I was like, well, there really isn't a cutoff point because the earlier you start, the better. You're going to have less wind the earlier that you start. And it's not like a guy starting at 10:30 a.m. is any different than somebody starting at 11:05. Like we could make 11 o'clock that quote unquote cutoff point that people ask about. But is that really doing us any help? So I think that that's my take on a lot of those sort of things. Same thing with the modeling. Like a lot of people, I do modeling. I use statistical modeling to my advantage where I can, but it is never a foolproof method of going out there and choosing plays. Like, for example, Sam Burns this week, I bet him. He had a good round 1. We'll see what happens out there in round 2. But he wasn't a model play for me at all. In fact, he was like one of the worst plays on paper that I could have possibly gone to. But sometimes the stats aren't everything. And I think that's a good example of that.
Yeah, and I want to say too, because Byron and I did talk about that a little bit about like the guys missing the fairway by this much on a few different shots can sway the numbers, and they could be the 50th worst for that day. And you're like, this guy's that much better. But if, again, you'll never really know the full intricacies. And I mean, stats are getting more and more advanced, but it's just little notes like that where it's like it's not that far apart. And it goes with all the other stuff that you mentioned there. So I do think that's important to talk about, but just breaking it down, it just goes back to it. It's not always one thing. And we talk about it using optimizers. That's not what we're going to talk about here, but in DFS, people using optimizers, using the projections, all that and more about ruling yourself out. They set too many rules in a sport like NFL Showdown. This is a PGA show, but just to note it, it's the same in PGA. If you are going to put your group to have a cutoff point, that's fine, but just know what you went with. But you could be ruling yourself out or grouping yourself out because the guy at 10, if your cutoff is 10:30 and the guy at 10:45 nukes the slate, then what are you going to say? Because it's not like he was that far off. It was 15 minutes. It's like he might have got the 15-minute wind period that actually hit the group in front of him worse, or the groups in front of him, and that stuff you cut off at might have been the open window for him when he got his best 3 holes or whatever, the best 1 hole, the way they play golf these days, 15 minutes, probably not even 1 hole some cases, but you know what I mean, of where like that's the opening that allowed that eagle to happen that was required. And again, that's very deep, we can never get there with that. But the main concept of not wanting to rule yourself out too much is like, if you're playing the morning guys, and you don't love the earliest guys that are going out, maybe you do love that spot, but you just don't love the pool there. You maybe mix in the ones that you do love from that spot, and maybe it's your sleepers or your lower own plays or your cheaper guys or whatever it might be. Maybe it's your studs. Depends on who's going out. But if you're doing the morning, I'm more likely to keep the morning and just say, okay, the afternoon is the cut. Like I'm not playing afternoon guys. I'm doing this. And even then, the levels to it are there's always somebody from the afternoon that comes through. So you don't have to rule them all out. You can make 5-1 stacks for showdown and play 5 guys from the morning because you don't love them all, not rule anybody out, but allow your, pick your 4 or 5 best guys, 3 to 5 guys for the afternoon and make a group with them at most one, put a minimum on them if you want them to be included and be able to do that. And then you're not ruling yourself out of anything. And you might find the one guy in the afternoon that it doesn't even have to be a nuke round. Like people automatically think he has to go out and crush it. No, if Hideki is one of the only morning studs and he ends up 60% owned because there's only 2 guys in the morning above 9K and he just gets all the love, you need the afternoon guy to score 30 when Hideki only scored 18 because he actually sucked in the morning and 60% of the lineups played him. And it's not always the exact, but just giving the example of why people, again, it's too much, like you said, too much of it's got to be this way or this way. A lot of these tournaments are one in the middle in that gray area of being able to find these nuances and find these extra intricacies and things that you can do to make it work in your favor and putting in that work and finding the edge. So that covers that. Let's talk about roster construction and then we'll round it up with the prize picks, betting, underdog slips, all that stuff. But just real quick on the DFS side, the roster construction thing, when you talked earlier about knowing everything by heart, I love that because I think that's you put in the work, quote unquote, no ball, no golf ball in this case is what and then you can apply your DFS concepts of ownership and game theory and leverage and all of that. I think where people struggle the most, Luke, is how much is too much, how aggressive is too aggressive. Yes. What is sort of, and again, no right answer. It's a bit more subjective, but knowing someone else's process that's had success really helps. And I'll chime in as well. But what sort of thoughts do you have around roster construction when it comes to how much is too much, over leveraging? You got like some weeks, I don't know of any weeks really where no chalk hits. Like the chalk is the chalk for a reason.
Yes.
You got to balance that. It's a balancing act. So maybe talk a little bit about roster construction here.
Yeah. So that's the existential question, I would say, of DFS, right? Is how much leverage do we actually need? And it's something that I've had to adjust in my career because when I first came out, I probably played too much chalk. Like I said, when I first started playing FanDuel, I didn't even think about ownership. I was too naive to know any better that far back in the day. But as time went on, I started thinking about getting some leverage. I listened to some shows. You guys way back in the day, I forget what YouTube channel you're on, but I was following a lot of your stuff. And, hear you guys talk about game theory and whatnot, and completely changed my strategy. So it's always something I'm trying to balance. I went through stages where I got way too pivot heavy. I was playing like 6 pivots in every single GPP lineup. I think it's about finding that fine balance, as you were saying, because every single week it feels like at least one piece of chalk or at least something close to chalk is going out there and getting there. So for main slate for me in golf, I'm usually going to have at least one guy in my lineups that is at least 15% owned. And it's not like I'm forcing them in. It's just that I'm going to end up on some of the good plays, especially when it's a 4-round sample size as opposed to just an 1-round sample size, 18 holes like we have for Showdown. Showdown, I'll have lineups where I have 6 pivots in it, and I won't lean off of that. I will just go out there and say, you know what? If I like these 6 players and they all happen to be sub 10% owned, so be it. I mean, I'll run out that sort of lineup. If there is a piece of chalk or two that I'm taking in Showdown, I will still eat that just like I do for main slate. But in general, when we have that larger sample size, when the cream rises to the top, it's usually what we get when we have more rounds to work with. You'll see me playing a little bit more ownership in most cases. So it's always something I'm trying to adjust. And I was doing these review shows about 2 years ago. I was doing them after every single event, kind of going through the ownership and stuff. And I learned a lot about my process by doing so. And the only reason I stopped doing it is because football season came around again that year, ended up taking too much time away from me. But I feel like a lot of people learned from that. And it's something that everyone can do themselves. What I was doing is I was downloading the CSV from all the different contests that I was entering. I was taking all the ownership out there from every contest, putting them into the same spreadsheet. And I was projecting them and comparing them to my own projections to what I was putting out there. And what I was noticing when going through a lot of that stuff was that the single entry ownership was vastly different than what we had in the large field GPPs. Large field GPPs ownership was very accurate. I mean, that's what my ownership projections are made for. So you would hope that they'd be pretty accurate across the board. What I noticed, though, is that in single entries that there were a few trends happening. I noticed that weather edges were getting played a lot more in single entries, and I noticed that the chalk was getting chalkier and that your pivots were getting more pivoty. They were getting even lower owned than what you had before. And I had heard that from people in the industry before, but I had never really followed it that closely to see what's happening with all those trends. And that's what helped me out with making my lineup construction process, because it gave me a really good idea of the kind of contest and how that would impact what other people are doing and how I could leverage against it. And I've been a huge proponent on some of my showdown shows about playing single entries and just being willing to be a little bit more bold, because in those single entries, my theory for why people play a little bit like in poker, we call people nits that don't want to go out there and bet. They're scared to go out there and get any action. People play like nits in single entries because they're playing for more money and they only have one lineup to work with. So they want to get things right. They don't want to take as many risks because they wonder about what happens when they get things wrong. So in single entries for showdown, I'll play a ton of pivots because I know they're going to be even lower owned than what they probably should be. So I know it was a long answer there.
No, it's really good stuff, man. Definitely really good stuff. And the last part specifically just reminded me of kind of what you talked about earlier. And I would say that, you should be comparing your game style for classic slate versus showdown. And showdown, I want more aggression because I could actually still beat you. You could have 6 sort of a nit type lineup where you tighten up and you're getting 6 30-pointers, right? But I could get 3 or 4 60-pointers and then get away with an 18-pointer and a 21-pointer for my last 2 because I got the 4 nuke rounds. You didn't even have a chance to get one. You got a chance to get 1 or 2 of them if those guys even got there. So it's like harder to, again, subjective. It's harder to frame up, easier to talk about it than it is to be about it. Everyone knows that's why we're watching this, trying to learn and get better. But you nailed it. Versus in the classic slate, there's the cut aspect to it. But again, at a no cut, we're not really separating that right now. I may take on a more aggressive approach because I want 2 really good rounds and they're going to play all 4. Then I don't need them to be as safe to get me through and make the cut and then see what happens over the weekend, so on and so forth. I need all these big rounds. I need heavy scoring. I need to rack up points. It's a no cut. It could take 750 to 800 points to win this week. And that's very high. Most weeks are much less than that, but just saying on those weeks, that's what I'm thinking about. So you nailed it there. I think that's a great point and many people can take from that. I think it's also something to be said for not even worrying about the ownership, both ends of the spectrum in showdown. Now, you're not going to jam all the chalk, but just saying it's your showdown decisions are more based around the data you have at hand now, how you like to play, and then knowing you should probably be a little bit more aggressive because there is going to be nuke rounds out there and they matter so much more because it is one round. It's not like in classic where I laugh after somebody makes 2 bogeys to start the well. Jacob Bridgman a couple weeks ago was dead after 2 bogeys start. They said, oh, he's done. And then he was, I think, first round leader, or he was, leader after day 2 or something like that. And making the cut with ease, thought he was dead after 2 holes. Oh, it's almost like he got to play 34 more holes because it's a 36 hole cut event. So you don't have to be that crazy about it then. But in showdown, it does hurt you. The minute, if it's a bogey free type course and you lose that early, that sucks. If it's an eagle opportunity that's huge, 8 foot for eagle, you really want them to convert that because it's a game changer on the showdown scorecard. It matters the same and scores well in classic. It's still important, but I'm saying when we have one slate, one game, one day, etc., that's when it's extra important. So taking on that aggressive stance, I like it. You have more data at hands. You know what that looks like. And ownership, be damned, they're all playing the same. Just like if Hideki's going to be 60%, like I keep using this example because he's the only high-priced guy in a wave advantage, I can literally just leave whatever Hideki to the next guy is. Guess what I'm comfortable leaving on the table today for salary? That much, because I don't need Hideki in 100% of my lineups just because everyone else thinks he should be 50 or 60%. No, they just think I have the money to spend, so I'm going to spend it. So
exactly.
Classic, I think you can take some of that to your point and apply it. You're not saying who are the 2 chalk guys I'm going to put in because I need chalk. It's wherever you end up landing, but you can really assess it in a sort of reverse engineer style. You can do the engineering background. You can look at that and say, look, I already got these 2 dudes down low that I'm very comfortable with. I think this week you and I did a show together and you were interested in some of the guys like Norlander and Ryder, and somebody like Ryder was first round leader. Didn't pop anywhere. Didn't really do too much. He popped in places. I shouldn't say that. Sorry, he popped in places, but wasn't going to have the ownership. So didn't pop in ownership too much. And you were like, you know what? I'm fine with that. There's like 4 other guys there. The public likes more at 7,200, but I'm going to go right. It's only 1 round. Could have applied that for first round leader and got some winning tickets that way, which we'll round out on here in a minute. Just to note it, you okay. So there you go. So you have that in your bag of being able to say, okay, if I'm already on these guys, and again, I know you weren't on Corey Connors this week, but if for whatever reason he's the guy that it led you to, you can make your decisions based off of that. Like I have room to breathe here, and I really do truly think it's Corey Connors week. And so if that's you, know that, but don't have chalk. And now I land on Corey Connors. Better just plug him in too. Well, then you better throw it in some cash games because that's kind of what you're building for. And you might have a 0% opportunity based on, even if you got it all right, in large field, in classic slate. There's going to be so many combos against you. Your odds to the top, especially as a, without a huge battle of 2v2s and 1v1s and similar builds and all that stuff, like you're setting yourself up for failure more than you are a success. You're setting yourself up for min cashes more than you are for top heavy prizes. So you got to think about the contest selection, which we're not going to spend a ton of time on. I got that covered more in other segments, but thought you did a really good job breaking that down and giving some ideas that we could pass across to the people. Let's round it out, Luke. Let's talk about this betting stuff. It's almost like a bonus segment because it is DFS Mastermind, but I actually think so many people are getting into this, myself included, of more of these slips and betting. What are some of the ways that you can bring across the same data from DFS to betting, and then talk a little bit about underdog versus prize picks versus just the similarities, differences, anything you want to bring to the table when it comes to props specifically, because that's where you focus a lot on.
Yeah, so a good play is a good play, is I think the good place to start. So, everyone probably has their own DFS process now. If you're looking at shots gained metrics, could be like round 2, round 3 historical. I know things like Shipadation, like the Stone, when they have the approach series, putting series, it's a good way to try and find some good plays. I use that same kind of process for props. Now, it is maybe a few extra steps to go out there and figure out exactly what to enter, but a lot of the same things we're doing for DFS to find our top plays, you can translate the props too. So for example, with ball striking stats, we love seeing that out there from round to round. That applies over there to props. Guys that putted or chipped way above their baseline, like we hate those kind of players typically because it's not like they're 100% due to come back down to earth, but there's a good chance that they see some regression. Those kind of things always apply, but where it gets a little bit different, and this is how I try to simplify the prop process. First step is to figure out the averages for the course, projected averages for pretty much every category that you can think of. Now, when I'm heading into an event, I look at last year. They have a bunch of different databases out there, some of them free, where you can get the stat averages from the year before. You always want to have a baseline for where the average player is going to be. Now, for rounds 2 through 4, so like for today, for example, I ran all the averages after round number 1 to get a really good sense out there for tomorrow. Then what you do, this is at least my process with it, is then I look at the weather. I see, hey, is this weather going to change these averages too much in one direction or the other? When you get more and more into it, you want to make it a little bit more complicated. Then you add some pin locations on top of that. And then, hey, you may even think about the tour and their the kind of things they do on like moving day on top of that too. So you start to adjust those averages. And then based on those averages, and it's never going to be exactly correct. I mean, I've been doing this a long time and I get things wrong when it comes to projecting the averages. But once you have those averages, it makes it real easy to go out there and find prop value because you're doing everything comparatively. You say, okay, this is what the average player is going to do. You can look at players' average shots gained, right? That's something that we're always looking at for recent form. So let's say somebody's averaging like 1.5 shots gained to the field. Then let's give them that 1.5 shots gained to the field. Let's take the average and let's subtract 1.5 from that number. And it's maybe not an exact projection. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. But that's the general idea. And if you're looking at fairways or greens, say a player averages like 1 green gained per round, again, just kind of simplifying it a bit, say the average is 11.5, well, it's about a 12.5 projection. Now, there are a lot of other things that complicate it, but you don't have to be, looking at every single possible factor when you're first getting started, right? You can obviously just kind of dip your toes in, kind of get the feel for it before you dive on all the way in. But we talked about field strength before. That's another thing that you could use to possibly impact play. Modeling players' course fit at a course, right? That can kind of start to adjust their projections. And once you start to think about all of that, that's when you get a really well-rounded process. So it's taken me 4 years to really start to incorporate all of those things. But yeah, it's those first 3, when it's get the averages, look at the weather, and then use them to find props. That's really the big 3 right there. And I know it sounds like a lot. It frankly is. You definitely have to learn it. It's not something that you'll just pick up on right away. But once you start to pick up on it, it is such a great tool for DFS because that information does not just go away. Like you're going to know all of those things going forward.
Yeah, you can apply it to anything. And we're specifically talking about props. But I think that's where people get a piece of confusion, if you will, of kind of everything that you just said is that, again, nobody's here should be scared of hard work. That's what it's all about. You do got to put the work in. But the point is, too, and you talked about this earlier, like everyone always, you're not playing against somebody else with these prop picks. Always there is events and things like Splash Sports where you can play against others and still use props or scoring in a different manner. But in something like Underdog, you are playing against Underdog. Yes. You have to remember there's such a casual market there that they're still going to be okay just putting out their stuff because someone who sees the guy that was horrible in approach and doesn't deep dive them to see it was one bad hole and sees it's like, that's Tommy Fleetwood and Patrick Cantlay looked good against approach, they'll just go bet Cantlay over Fleetwood, or they'll bet Cantlay strokes instead of Fleetwood's and take the other side of Fleetwood and then be like, how did Fleetwood go 6 under today when yesterday he was so bad on approach? No, it was 1 hole. So they're going to make enough money regardless, and they want to make the most money, and that's where the sad parts of limiting and all that stuff, which I'm sure over time, who knows, with more states and regulations and things, we'll see, because it sucks they can have their cake and eat it too. But in general, topic for another day, they're still going to make money. It's not the same. Even the DFS bubble that people always talk about, yes, it's got a little bit bigger, but it's still, there's tons of casuals that play, like a clear weather edge, and only 23% of the field is stacking. Is that a lot more than 8% a few years ago? Yes, but it's still not even 1/4 of the field. 3/4 of the field isn't going, and people say, but it didn't work out anyway. That's fine. But if it had of, they would have got destroyed. And that's over 75% of the field, meaning the only part that matters is there is still a bubble there. It's still a game that you can exploit, find angles and edges, and go with that. Plus big prizes. Not often can you win these huge prizes on these other sites. But in props, to your point, that's just another factor as well. If you're willing to do the deep dive and dig in and find it, it's not just betting against the public or what everybody else is doing. It's using it to your advantage. And also another reason you're such a good follow, and why, if you guys are not following Luke, I don't know what you're doing, make sure you're on top of it, but he goes to a lot of these events, boots on the ground, checks it all out. That's where I think you've done a ton of market movement in the past, because they're not sending somebody out to find out that these greens are way easier to hit this week. And then they put out their greens numbers 1 to 2.5 strokes less than what they probably should actually be at. I've seen Mayo do it from information he's got from on site. You've literally been on site and then brought it back to the people on your YouTube shows and stuff. These numbers are wrong. And it's not, it doesn't, like, people say, well, how would they be wrong? They're not, they don't care. It's not a big enough bet market. They're not sending people up, but now all of a sudden it becomes a bigger bet market. And they do have the people in the back end and the numbers and wherewithal to say, oh, we messed this one up, and they start adjusting it as they go, but it's too late. You already got in on them early, but now that's when they look to limit you long-term. If you continuously find those edges where their mess ups are happening, you're finding the positives, but that's where you can still make money. And most people are betting less, right? They're betting $100 a week or less. Again, you can I always do with Mastermind. You can always extrapolate that. Maybe you're 1,000 a week. You could be 10,000 a week. There's people in here betting that. It's use 100, you 10, 100, 1,000, etc. You can extrapolate it up or down, but the majority of people are physically betting probably less than $250 a week, let's say. And maybe that's on all things, DFS, betting, prop picks, etc. But with props, people are usually betting less. That's going to be allowed to go on a lot longer. And you just have to realize you're not making 10 grand here, 20 grand there. You're not playing for 200 grand like on DraftKings in the lottery. But do you want to make money? Most people do. Does that pay for bills? Does that pay for things like subscriptions and extras and other bets, and give you the opportunity to be in the game longer and cover off, so maybe you can hit a GPP win or something like that because you're covering now from more angles than others? That's where I think things tie together, right? You can make DFS is hard. Prop betting is hard. Betting is hard. It's all hard, but it's not as hard when you put the work in, put the time, look for these angles. And it's really helpful to have one thing cover the other if it doesn't quite go your way. The best weeks, and I know you've had plenty of these, are when it all goes your way. Your first round leader is also in your DraftKings lineup. He continues over the weekend. He ends up being the value you need to pay off. You win a GPP. Oh, the data comes in for showdown. You got a good, it doesn't always happen like this, but it can. And that's kind of the idea. And you only need a few of those weeks a year in golf to be able to make up for all the bad weeks. Any final thoughts just when it comes to that? Because I think that's really what people need to realize. It's a long-term game. You've been doing it for a while now. It's not one good weekend. Are you going to quit when you have your one good weekend? I don't know. If I win, I'll say this. I'll round my thoughts out with this. If I win all 3 milli makers next week, the 33-33, the hundo, and the 10 with the same lineup, 3 milli, one weekend, 3 milli makers on the same weekend, you might just have to ride off into the sunset just because how would you ever outdo that ever again? You would never feel that in your lifetime. But I'll let you round out your final thoughts, Luke. Appreciate it.
That's like getting struck by lightning 3 times in a row. So if that happens, I wouldn't blame you for wanting to ride off into the sunset. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Just like DFS, it's not going to get handed to you. Even somebody like me that's been limited on every book in existence, I have downswings when it comes to prop betting too. Like, for example, last month for prop betting was, I think, the worst I've ever had unit-wise. Now, because I'm limited on books, wasn't entering for the same sort of money that I'd want to, which blessing in disguise. Thank you for limiting me, right? Not letting me have a bad month, but yeah, it's like anything, right? You have bad DFS months too. The prop stuff might be able to make up for it, that sort of thing. But when you get everything rolling at the same time, like I said, it's a magical thing. You want to be able to embrace that when you can. And having other pieces of exposure, it's just an extra sweat to have, right? So if you enjoy that aspect of it, being able to prop bet is just another way to be able to enjoy that. And I did want to mention before too, is the sports books. I know we mentioned that with the DFS before, being able to use those for comparison. You can use those for those prop sites too, like Underdog and Prize Picks. I think the thing that makes them really good value at times is they'll post different odds than like DraftKings and FanDuel. And being on site in person really matters. Those sites like DraftKings, FanDuel, they'll have multiple people on site at every single event. These sites like DraftKings and FanDuel, much lower budget sites, are not going to have that same luxury. So being able to even just look at the sportsbook odds, sometimes you can find some of that data without even being at the golf course. And then, of course, if you can be there, all the better, right? I love being there at events. Heck, I'm going to be there later on this afternoon over there at Live, kind of doing the same thing. And just a bunch of different ways you can find an edge on this prop side.
And just applying that across. I mean, not, fully going for like arbitrage here or something, but just saying in general, like I've seen the tournaments where it's X amount of strokes total for the event, and another site has it way higher. You can like middle a 3-stroke difference. I've seen it. It exists. I know it doesn't always, and people are like, no, that would never happen anymore. Possibly not anymore, but it has been that far off on certain books or strokes and stuff. So sometimes you can find angles in, but it's trying to take the data and the points you have. If it doesn't add up for DFS, or you can't find a full angle to approach it, that's why it's nice to have prop sites, betting sites, extra things in the background of ways you can apply the knowledge of where it makes sense. Oh, I couldn't fit Sam Ryder into the lineup this week. It just didn't work out. I ended up not landing in that range. I wasn't going to adjust it for Sam Ryder, but man, I still feel like he's going to come out. And I'm most worried that he comes out and just has a hot round one. And that might not even matter in DFS by the end of the weekend. But to protect myself and make sure I cover the angle, I'm not even betting first round leaders this week. Let me just throw $10 on him first round leader at 100 to 1, 200, whatever he was. I don't know. But my point being, you throw that in there, it's just an extra sweat. It's a way to cover off some of the FOMO that you didn't get to him and what if. And then, by the way, he goes and hits it and your lineup's still doing good. So your lineup went well and that. But if it's not, guess what? Your whole week and beyond is paid for because of that hunch and things like that. And I'm just using that's results oriented, but it's not crazy process to go off the board and do something that you're looking for angles of attack. You can only put 6 people in your DFS single entry, and you have to follow a salary cap and so on and so forth. So if you have 5 guys in the 7K range you like, and you fit 4 of them in that give you the 2v2 at the top that you feel best about, you don't have to leave the 7th man out in that case. You are able to go bet him in a matchup, bet him to win, bet him to first round lead, like something else where you're like, I had a hunch, I just couldn't get to him in this lineup. That's a backup plan. And it's not saying just to cover your ass. It's to say you clearly had some love there. You just can't fit everyone everywhere. So there's always different angles of attack in. So lots of good stuff here, Luke. Really appreciate you hopping on and doing this. This segment's going to be awesome. I know people are going to love it. Before we get out of here, let the people know all the content that you got going on, your social media, your YouTube, all that. Break it all out. If they're not already following you, I can guarantee they most certainly should be, and they will be now, but let the people know where they can find you and appreciate it again.
Yeah, so GSLuke DFS on YouTube, that is where I'm going to be posting most of my content, live streams, that sort of thing. And same thing over there on Twitter/X as well. And when I'm on the golf courses, I try and tweet out some of the stuff that I see. So make sure you follow me on those different sites. And yeah, should have ourselves a heck of the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think we will. Could be a lot more to come from that as well. We're very excited. So really appreciate you, Luke. Thanks for all you do over at Ship It Nation. Thanks for helping us out here. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Mayo experience. Experience.